Thank you for auditing Professor Sky's Record Review, where I normally talk about new music, but I have to talk about the passing of Charlie Watts, the drummer for the Rolling Stone, and I'd like to make a case that he was the best. He was certainly my favorite. Now, when I say the best, when I say my favorite, I'm talking about the pantheon of rock and roll drummers, of classic rock and roll drummers, you know? When I was a kid, it was John Bonham of Led Zeppelin because he hit the drums so hard, and eventually it was Keith Moon because he was so creative, and maybe Mitch Mitchell because he worked together jazz so well with everything that he was doing. And even at times it was Ringo, just because he was so lyrical and so talented in playing the way that he played. But I think Charlie Watts is definitely my favorite. I think potentially he was the best of all of them. Now, it's not because the way that he plays is impossible to imitate. Now, certainly he could do more, and he had a whole solo career where he played jazz and he played Charlie Parker's music. I listen to it, it's fine, but I actually don't think Charlie Watts is at his best when he's playing his best. He is the best example of the Dr. Ian Malcolm school of music. Just because you can doesn't mean you should. Nobody played more correctly than Charlie Watts. You know? Like a good guitar solo, right? Where there's not too many notes. You know how they say, oh man, it's not about the notes you play, it's about the notes you don't play. Charlie Watts was the master of the notes that you don't play. In particular, I'd like to make this kind of a specific argument, okay? The album Sticky Fingers, okay? My favorite Rolling Stones album, depending on what day you ask me. Hey, look, it looks like Charlie Watts is wearing Joe D'Alessandro's pants there, doesn't it? That's funny. That's him up there, by the way. This album, I think, shows his dynamism and his genius at drums. I'm going to give a couple examples from this album. I'm not talking about Brown Sugar, the only song I skip on the album because it makes me uncomfortable. I mean a song like Wild Horses, okay? Now, what are the most famous songs? Okay, go to 1 minute and 17 seconds on Wild Horses and listen to the way the drums come in. It's one of these songs with great dynamics. It's one of these songs that builds up and gives you this great feeling of soaring and emotional power. And what does Charlie Watts do? How does he wah? He goes like this. He just starts drumming. No fill, no trill, no thrills or skills or spills, just plays the damn drum beat. It is exactly the right drum beat, the exact right thing to be played at the exact time. Now go later on in this album to the song Sister Morphine, a very similar setup, you know, another song about heroin. They were all about heroin back then, even the ones that weren't about heroin. And it's another song where the drums come in late, about a minute later than they do on Wild Horses. And this time there is a fill, but it's just, I don't know, 10 notes? I mean, I could play it. I'm an okay drummer. You could play it. You're not a good drummer. Whoever you are, you could definitely play it. But he just knew exactly what to play. Leading up to Mick going into his line, just goes to show. Just like the menace of the song is right there in the drums. Can't You Hear Me Knocking on the same album? He's playing so far behind the beat. John Bonham gets a lot of credit, and he deserves a lot of credit for always playing so far behind the beat. But it sounds like on Can't You Hear Me Knocking that he's just on a completely different track. And it's a song that's drenched in percussion and drenched in all these things that are happening, but Charlie Watts is always there. And he gets the credit. He always gets credit as being very steady, right? And being the backbeat, and that's part of his style. But there's an interesting cover of a Rolling Stones song that I think actually really reveals the greatness of Charlie Watts. That is Devo's cover of Satisfaction. What they did was they took his drum beat and they dissected it into pieces. It's the kind of drum beat that, if you're fast enough or dexterous enough with your hand, you can play it all with one hand. And what Devo managed to do with that cover of the Rolling Stones song, their dissection of the great song, was underline the one-handed groove of Charlie Watts. What made him so mesmerizing is that he rarely played the snare and the hi-hat at the same time. So as opposed to being a basher, he was, and just that one hi-hat per measure not hit gave so much space, gave so much energy to the rest of the music. It's amazing. I mean, the Rolling Stones are a great band, and there's so many great things about the Rolling Stones. I'm not trying to say that if it weren't for Charlie Watts, the Stones wouldn't be half as good, but they certainly wouldn't be as good without that style of drummer who knows what not to play. Like when he gets fancy, it's in writing crazy drum beats like Honky Tonk Woman, you know, like those kinds of rhythms, that same kind of sense where you feel like you can almost do everything with just one hand. I've seen the Rolling Stones in concert 3 times. I didn't want to go any of the times I went. I mean, not really. I don't need to see these guys make more money for their private jets, okay? I don't need to see, you know, modern Mick. I don't need to see modern Keith. I sure as hell don't need to see Ronnie Wood, okay? I went to see Charlie Watts. It was still, in 2015, whenever the last time was I saw the Rolling Stones, just as exciting as it was listening to Wild Horses for the first time, you know, to watch him play and see him live, and more than any other drummer. He was almost like a bassist, the way that he was a drummer. Like he was so relaxed and so comfortable and so low-key. And watching him in concert, just watching him do the typical Charlie Watts beat with the great, unbelievably restrained and perfectly played fills every single time was worth seeing it. I was going to see the Stones when they came around again, and when I heard that Charlie Watts wasn't touring, I was like, forget it. You know? He is the first integral member of the Rolling Stones to leave. No, you poster, you don't fall down just to make some kind of artistic point, you know? I mean, okay, so, you know, we have the rhythm guitarists, right? So, you know, we have the rhythm guitarists. That's not good, you know? So you had Brian Jones, and he left. You know, he was replaced by Mick Taylor, and he was replaced by Ronnie Wood. And I don't like Ronnie Wood. I think he's like one of the worst Rolling Stones, but he has been able to be there. Bill Wyman left several years ago. It's fine. His sound isn't integral. A lot of the best bass lines in the Rolling Stones are played by Keith anyway. So really, losing Charlie is the first real way that the Stones really are no more. So I'm not just mourning the loss of my poster. I'm not just mourning his passing, but really the end of the Rolling Stones. Realistically, the Rolling Stones are officially done. I will also say that with all the classic rock bands, I have such a hard time picking who's my favorite member. Like, of course, I love Pete Townsend because he wrote all the songs, but Keith Moon is the heart and soul. And oh my God, how can you end with soul? Oh my, I mean, Jimmy Page versus John Bonham. I don't know. But with the Rolling Stones, there's never John, Paul, George, Ringo. You can't pick them. But the Rolling Stones, it's easy. Charlie Watts, just the coolest, best, most interesting, most peaceful presence. Okay, there you go. There's my small homage to Charlie Watts. And I will also say I sort of want to apologize for people who used to play in bands with me, because by the end of my drumming career, I only tried to imitate Charlie Watts. I only did that style drum beat because I just wanted to be Charlie. But I wasn't good enough. Okay, well, until next time, I hope this video... What's your favorite Charlie Watts song to play? You know, I mean, to listen to. You know, like, what made... Like, beyond the standard, like, oh, he was very steady and very there, what makes you think that he was the best? Okay, there's the camera.